So, it's a pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Nigel Guenole, who's a senior lecturer in management here at Goldsmiths, University of London. He specializes in talent management and applied statistics. Dr. Guenole's work has appeared in leading scientific journals, including Industrial Organizational Psychology, Perspectives on Science and Practice, and Frontiers in Quantitative Psychology and Measurement, as well as in the popular press, including the Sunday Times and the financial technology news channel called FinExtra.
Thanks, Lars.
And he will present his work on organizational practices and learning in these for us today.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Thanks very much, Lars. So I'm going to talk about my work that starts off, I've got this picture here of this guy self-destructing, and that's because my topic is about two sides of personality, the bright side and the kind of the dark side of personality, where I've been working, and I'm going to move into intra-individual kind of applications of it. I'm going to start talking about what I'm going to do, so it's more of a study protocol. I call it a multi-channel model of maladaptive personality states and moment-to-moment worker deviance. So worker deviance is kind of like counter-productivity, things that you do at work that you shouldn't be doing, and to link it back to education, I guess I would say that teachers are workers. You know, teachers engage in these types of behaviors as much as any other employee. So a couple of propositions for the talk. I'm going to say personality profiling has potential to prevent maladaptive behavior at work much more than it has so far. One way that we can do this is by integrating some of these intra-individual techniques that we've heard a lot about today. And then the second way we can do it is starting to study some of the more extreme areas of personality that have been talked about a lot in the context of the new Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, the DSM-5, and I'll propose the study protocol. So I'll talk a little bit about what we know about personality already. If you want to summarize everybody here in the room, we can probably do it on 2 dimensions. We could describe each of you in 2 dimensions. We have kind of like a brake and an accelerator, you know, and in terms of the brake, it's like a socialization factor and it keeps you out of trouble. The accelerator is the learning factor, and this is also called growth. They call it growth or plasticity. So that's at the highest level. Beneath that, we can describe each of us with 5 factors of personality broadly: openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. And these have implications for the way people get on with their work, how they do in their work, but also how students achieve. There's been a lot of work on student personality traits and the implications for student learning. Beneath that, there are probably, it seems that there are 2 personality dimensions under the big 5, so 5 twos are 10. So for instance, under extroversion, it turns out that there is like a dominance factor, how much you want to be in charge, how much you want to lead, and then there is a sociability factor, which is just, you know, how easy you are to get along with. Beyond that, it's arbitrary. We can still go down and have narrower dimensions than that, but it's arbitrary below that. It turns out that there is a biological basis for these personality dimensions. One is the serotonic system, one is a dopaminergic system. They're relatively stable. You know, they do these studies when they take your caregiver reports of your personality when you're 3, and they make predictions of when you're 15 and 16 and this kind of thing, and they can predict it. There are like reliable relationships there. And the biological influence of personality on how you perform is moderated by the environment. So on the one hand, I'll talk about what we know about personality at work. Personality at work tends to predict how you go about your job. So there are 2 kind of things when we talk about how you go about your job. One is when you're under pressure, do you withdraw and engage in counterproductive behaviors, which is what I'm kind of focusing on today. And then the other one is what they call extra role behavior, things that are important to your job performance, but they're not formally written in your job descriptions. And these relationships are explained by motivational mechanisms, and psychometric profiling is used a lot for executive selection and work, so we would think that that's making a big contribution. But here I say, I end this next slide with saying kind of predictive power is moderate. It's not a strong predictor of future work performance, and personality tests are much like they were 10 years ago, probably much like they were 20 years ago, maybe 30, I don't think loads has changed since the first time I did a questionnaire on the internet to, doing one last week perhaps. A lot of overlap. And there are some bigger kind of problems. Even though we're doing all of this personality profiling, we're seeing a lot of trouble with executives just doing things that they shouldn't be doing. We have the LIBOR manipulation was one of the classic kind of examples that we've had in the news, where the bankers had this kind of internal club. They were instant messaging each other across the institutions and fixing the rate. Here is another kind of typical article that we have coming up: how to prevent the powerful from abusing their privilege. So it goes in and talks about the Enron scandal. There is another one, recent kind of problem we've seen at Wells Fargo, where people have been setting up bogus accounts. It goes on and on and on. Lately there is, another recent one, the Olympus investigation shows ethical lapses and a caterer with clout. So you can Google that, it's an interesting story. And it makes you wonder, if we're doing all of the psychometric profiling, the psychometric testing on these executives, is this thing kind of plugged in? Is it working, or is there something we could do better here? And I think that there is. First of all, I'll talk about the different kinds of deviance, and then how using maladaptive personality traits and an intra-individual approach might contribute to mitigating some of that. And I don't believe for a second that kind of an intra-individual difference is going to stop it entirely. When people talk about poor behavior at work, they say that it's complex, and they say that it's irregular, and it goes beyond the bounds of the organization that you're working in, or the school that the teachers would be working in, but there's still more that we can do. So some of the different kinds of deviance: one is production deviance. This is leaving early, intentionally working slow, or taking long breaks. They have property deviance, which is when you sabotage equipment. This is getting a little extreme, you steal property, or you take kickbacks or bribes. You have political deviance, which is like playing favorites, it's like gossiping about colleagues or blaming others when things go wrong. Then there is this kind of personal aggression, which is harassment, verbal abuse, and endangerment. So we've talked about the normal end of personality. I think that maladaptive traits are quite important, and Andrew, you talked about some of these kind of maladaptive traits earlier, and there's just a few kind of points on this slide that say maladaptive traits matter. So when you have a look at the existing work, there are different types of personality traits that when you have them together, they're not a good combination for your health. So one is type A, being switched on all the time, goal chasing, and also being irritable and grumpy. That's kind of like, they call it toxic type A, and it leads to coronary heart disease. When they have a look at the DSM-4 kind of model of personality, they find that some of those 10 dimensions that are there in the DSM-4 predict what they call leader derailment. So this is some of those kind of bad behavior examples that we saw earlier. Sometimes people try to take the normal personality profiles and build models that predict the outcomes, try to predict the maladaptive outcomes. And then there is this kind of specific cluster of aberrant traits that people call the Dark Triad. So one is narcissism, another is antagonism, and another is kind of psychoticism. So this is all falls under a broad label of kind of aggression, aggressive kind of behavior. But this is like a previous generation, if you like. There is a new generation that resolves a lot of problems with these earlier ones, and the language that I've heard that people use to describe why the new model is necessary is because there is rampant comorbidity between the dimensions of these previous models. They don't discriminate between one another. If you're high on one, you tend to be high on another, which suggests that there is some kind of higher level kind of overarching model that explains those dimensions lower down. And that's that DSM-5 trait model, is something that I think that we could, that I think that we should start bringing in, and I've started to look at a little bit in my work. But so far, primarily between individual, and I'm looking to move into an intra-individual approach. So what might the way forward be? Well, increasingly evidence points towards performance being dynamic rather than static, and that there is substantial within-person variation. So this morning I heard that the preponderance, or the largest share of the variance was at the within level rather than at the between level. I don't know that I can say that that's the case based on what I've read in the industrial and organizational psychology literature, but I can say that people are starting to say that there are substantial components of the variance explained in personality measures that sit at the within level. If we can identify those within level structures and relationships and processes, it might be the case that we can redesign jobs, or we can make interventions that get to people just when they're about to make that wrong decision, or to do something that they shouldn't be doing. And there are different kinds of applications that I see already emerging. There is one where people can do voice analyzers, for example, of your past telephone call to measure what they call speech prosody, the rate at which you are speaking, and compare it to kind of baseline measures and say whether you are more anxious or less anxious, more worried or less worried. So those are an example of the type of intervention that you might be able to do if we could develop these generating models for troublesome behavior at work. So in the next section, I want to talk about the design of a study protocol. I want to talk about a target conceptual model that's based on core self-evaluations. Then I want to do a kind of a mini review of kind of intra-individual studies that I've been reading based on some work, some prolific researchers, a research group in Belgium that are doing a lot of work in this area. Then I want to propose the kind of study protocol for what I'm hoping to do in this maladaptive area. So first of all, a target model in the area of core self-evaluations called the Core Self-Evaluations Job Effect and Job Satisfaction Multi-Level Model. It's quite an acronym. So core self-evaluations is a broad general trait comprising a number of specific traits. It's characterized by being about fundamental beliefs that the individuals hold about themselves and about the world. And the core self-evaluations, if they're fundamental and they're broad and they're self-evaluation focused, if that's the case, they're considered core self-evaluations. And this is based on the work. I should have had Tim Judge actually as the organizational psychologist who proposed this model originally. So it's the kind of narrow traits for core self-evaluations are self-esteem, generalized self-efficacy, locus of control, and neuroticism. And at the within level, the model suggests that aspects of one's work and one's environment are sources of state core evaluations, and that the state core self-evaluations in turn are associated with job affect, and the job affect leads to episodic affect-driven behaviors, and the within individual variation may occur over minutes, over hours, over days, or even over years. At the between component of the model, the within group mean centering predicts the average levels of the concepts, and there is a moderating effect there that I think is easiest to explain in the image here. So this is the core self-evaluations model. At the within level here, we see these sources of core self-evaluations: performance, how you're going, job rewards, goal attainment, intrinsic rewards, feedback, and life experiences predict state core self-evaluations, which in turn lead to job affects, your job attitudes, your job moods, and your work emotions, and that in turn drives affect-laden behavior. And at the between level, Judge proposes that, you know, your genes and your major life events impact your trait core self-evaluations, and we have a cross-level moderation here where trait core self-evaluations impacts the strength of the relationship between the sources of core self-evaluations and your state core self-evaluations. So the work that I'm reading in the kind of IO literature seems to, a lot of it talks about this cross-level moderation of the strength of the relationship between the antecedents of the states and the states, and the kind of work seems to be focusing on almost the mediations at the within level and also the functional forms of the relationships between of that mediated effect. So people are doing kind of quadratic relationships, quadratic mediated relationships. I've even seen people talk about exponential kind of decays and that sort of thing going on there, and this seems to be a common feature, this moderating effect. Now, so yes, I'm trying to get a study going in this area and trying to do it using this new maladaptive DSM-5 trait model and linking it to the counterproductive work outcome. So what's already happening in the area? Well, these researchers are doing a lot of work. I mean, it's almost as hard to keep up with the amount of work that they have coming out in these different forms of intra-individual study. So the Hoffmans and Deviance is how I'm sure it's not pronounced like that, but as close as I can get. Coming out with a number of papers. I've had 5 or 6, and here I'll just talk about 3, and my goal is to highlight aspects of the design that I picked up and think are important for me to consider in the study that I'm putting together. So in the first study, Deviance and et al. 2016 looked at the impact of work pressure and complexity on state neuroticism and task performance. So they used, we had a question earlier about the what can you do when you can't have the student answer the questionnaire, I mean the smartphone during the day, because the school wouldn't let the mobile device into the school. These guys do something that might address that. They did 2 studies. One was an event reconstruction and one was a day reconstruction. So I think that this is probably an option. I've seen these guys getting more sophisticated as their studies go along. But in the event reconstruction, they would prime people and say, tell me about a particular event, tell me about how it was going, and then the next day they would present them the material from the same event and say, now, how was your performance, were you feeling, and that kind of thing. So they would do that with an event reconstruction, and in a second study there they did a day reconstruction. So at the end of the day they asked a series of questions about the performance episode and the kind of states that people were feeling. Interestingly, I think earlier on we heard about it might have been a probability sampling approach where people had gone into the schools and they randomized who was selected. I think that's quite important. It would be great to do, but it doesn't seem to be a strong feature of the industrial organizational psychology applications I'm seeing. This particular study was a convenience study. Another interesting comparison in the 2 studies, in the first study they had 46, and in the second study they had 45, and I heard the discussion earlier about the L2N. I heard it as low as 20, and I think I might have heard it as high as in the hundreds. In the regular multi-level modeling literature, at least, there are a lot of simulation studies because, you know, when you study things like the European Union, there's only 27 or 28, you can't go higher than that. And I think that when you get to like 30 or 26, you know which way I voted. They're trying to stay in. Okay, so where was I going with that? Yeah, and you can recover the parameters. You know, you can recover the parameters reasonably well with moderate levels. So here I think that it's okay. And as the comment came, it's it's the number of level 2 units times the number of level 1 units, which is the total possible number of observations, which is the important thing. And there they had 227 out of a maximum of 460, and then they had out of 450, I'm sorry, there. And then in terms of the length of the measure, this was another kind of important consideration for me. I want to go into organizations, and ideally I don't want to do the day reconstruction. I'd like to do it there while they're try to do experience sampling. They had 21 items for the state measure, and 21 items for the performance measure. So that might be a little, maybe that will be a little long. I think it was possible here because it was a reconstruction approach. So those are some of the things that I was looking at there. In the next study, Hoffman et al., same group of researchers, did a test of the core self-evaluations model that I previously saw. So they did a diary study rather than the event reconstruction, and they called it a concurrent study. So later on we will see that they build in lags between the time that they measure the state and the time that they measure the performance. But in this particular study, that was like a concurrent study where performance and state was measured at the same time. Again, it was a convenience sample, which has implications for the number of levels. So with educational researchers, I see 3 levels, 4 levels kind of going on, which is really interesting because you have time nested in the individual, and you have the individual nested in the class, and you have the class nested in the school. But we have like time nested in the individual, and the individual being in a convenient sample. So these studies don't tend to go to that higher, to go one higher level there. There they had the length of the daily measure was 22 items, and they randomized the items, as seems to be good practice from what I'm seeing from hearing from the educational researchers today. In a third study that they did, they looked at the impact of state conscientiousness on task and organizational citizenship behavior. So task behavior is like the quality, the quantity, and the timeliness of the work that you do, and organizational citizenship is doing the extra role behaviors that are important for organizational functioning but are not written in your job description. So again, we had a convenience sample in this IO application. In terms of the participants, they had 83 participants. Measurement occasions was 10 days, and the length of the daily measure there was a lot longer because they studied the facets of conscientiousness. That might be a little long, but these are the types of things that I'm looking to incorporate into the study that I'm going to do. Okay, so for my proposed study, keeping that in mind, I want to differentiate 2 forms of troublesome personality. One is internalizing and one is externalizing, which is consistent with the clinical psychology literature. So when you have a look at maladaptive behavior at an aggregate level, say a higher order factor model, there is what they call generalized psychopathology, but beneath that they have 2 factors. One is internalizing, where you just withdraw, and one is externalizing, where you hit out, basically, so you externalize. I want to align those traits with, I want to also differentiate internalizing and externalizing counterproductive work behaviors. I think that there are some counterproductive work behaviors, things we do at work that are probably not as harmful, and I think that there are probably some that are more harmful, and I'm wondering if it's the case that the ones that are externalizing are more troublesome than the ones where I just kind of withdraw and keep to myself. And then I want to align these and fit them into that broader conceptual model where we have the cross-level moderation of the work kind of environment and our perception of the work environment and a perception of whether we're likely to achieve our goals, impacting job performance via the mediating states. And I want to examine it with an event sampling. I've called it diary there, but I think I like the idea of event sampling. designed based on the review of typical diary approaches. So a little bit about personality traits versus states. I like this example from William Raval. He talks about the emotions being like the weather. Emotions last just for a few seconds, sorry, I've got this around the wrong way. So the weather lasts for hours, and that's like personality. You have weather systems which last for a shorter period of time, and that's kind of like your mood. And then you have your climate. Oh no, that is around the right way, I'm sorry. So weather is like the emotions, weather system is like the moods, and climate is like personality. So there is an analogy there that explains why we might measure personality traits separately to states, but with the exact same item content. Here's another kind of quote from Will Fleeson: states have the same affective, behavioral, and cognitive content as their corresponding states. But it was an interesting question that came up, the difference between Andrew's study and Lars's study, and one was a trait-focused measure adopted at the within intra-individual within level, and Lars I think made it more kind of time-specific. One thing that I've seen done in the industrial organizational psychology applications, the ones I've been reading, is people will say, since the last time I was assessed, and then they have the same kind of, they have the same, they have this item with the same content, but it is just the framing, or you could have the setup, within the last hour I have felt like, but it's exactly the same content, but it's just the kind of reference period that people talk about there. So I'll just tell you about the types of traits that we have to kind of include in the DSM-5 model. There is negative affect, which is kind of like extreme neuroticism, which is an internalizing style of coping with problems. We have detachment, which again is internalizing. The type of thing that people say when they're detached is, I have no positive feelings to express. And that's the opposite of extroversion. We have antagonism, which is like an externalizing behavior, exhibits diverse manifestations of antipathy towards others and a correspondingly exaggerated sense of self-importance. And that is contrasted in the Big Five literature with agreeableness, which is about being friendly, courteous, good-natured, cooperative, forgiving, and just a soft-hearted and agreeable person. Disinhibition and compulsivity is an externalizing approach to coping with problems. It's about being present, thinking about now, not thinking about the future, and not learning from anything that you've experienced in the past. And the opposite of that is compulsivity, and when you're compulsive, it's like being almost perfectionistic is one kind of manifestation of it in subclinical individuals. And then that's kind of contrasted in normal personality with conscientiousness. So psychoticism is different to, Hans Eysenck talked about psychoticism, and he talked about it being people who are not very conscientious and people who are being disagreeable. Psychoticism under the DSM-5 is a little different. It's kind of, one aspect of it, for instance, is being eccentric, and it's really extreme openness. So extreme broad-mindedness and being artistically sensitive and curious. I think when you're at the extreme level, you say odd things, you dress in strange ways, and sometimes you're ostracized by the people that are around you. So if I build the same kind of model that I'm talking about there for maladaptive personality, and I plant that onto a counterproductive model that we saw earlier, I think production deviance is mostly about internalizing, leaving work early, intentionally working slow, or taking long breaks. I think property deviance is like externalizing. That's when you're sabotaging, stealing, or taking kickbacks. Political deviance, I think the rest of them are externalizing. So favoritism, gossiping, and harassing and endangering. So I want to put these into the model that we were talking about earlier, where we have goals, tasks, and demands, beliefs about your success in achieving your goals, impact, this is the kind of internalizing channel, your negative affect and your detached states, which in turn impact internalizing deviance, which is like this withdrawal, this kind of counterproductivity in the form of withdrawal. And here we have this moderating effect. So I think that the theoretical rationale that seems the most developed so far is that negative affect narrows your attentional focus, and it narrows your attentional focus, making focusing on the challenges and the problems that are going on here, and higher individuals have a higher propensity for those to turn into the negative maladaptive states, which go across to the internalizing deviance. And in terms of an externalizing channel that I'm looking to test, we have a similar model here. So the goals, the task demands, and the beliefs about how successful you are going to be are likely to inhibit disinhibited and antagonistic states, which in turn predict externalizing deviance, which is sabotage. And my expectation, yes, I don't think the theoretical rationale is as developed as it is for the negative affect one, is that these being high on antagonism will be more likely to prime you to react in an antagonistic way, or to enter an antagonistic state as a result of perceiving, for example, having frustrations, or believing that your ability to meet your goals, ability to meet your task demands, exceeds the demands of the task. And then just on the model that I would propose to use here, I want to test this idea of a twin channel model of maladaptive states and work at deviance. I want to not have a diary study there. I've called it diary, but I think it's more kind of experience sampling. I would like to lag during the day. This seems to be something that's starting to happen in the IO literature applications, that they are taking the state measure and the state measure and the performance measure at different points. So the state measure has to come prior to the performance measure, so you can try to build a case for some kind of causal relationship there. And then the idea is I'm thinking randomized during the day, and then plus 1 hour, so you can, so that you can, make a reasonable case that the kind of the maladaptive state, which we've seen might only last for minutes, or it might only last for an hour, is related to the maladaptive behavior event. For the sample, I think is likely to be a convenience sample, unless I'm able to get into an organization, but I'm not so sure about that. Participants have started out high with 100 there. You've seen the applications so far have been 50 or 60, and proposing 10 measurement occasions for days. And the length of the measure I'm kind of working on. I saw that they had 40 item measures in one of those studies, but it was a reconstruction study, so you're kind of sitting there and you probably have time to do it. But I think that that's going to be too long when people are actually having to take time out of the course of their working day. So in summary, I think integrating intra-individual personality modeling approaches with maladaptive traits has the implication to mitigate poor behavior at work, and I think that if we can build these in the first instance, structural models at the within level, it'll suggest interventions that we might be able to make and start doing some of those A/B style experimental interventions. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Nigel. This interesting perspective, thinking of teachers in the workplace, and not as a primary function of what they do with their students in the workplace, but as employees. This is a fascinating perspective. So, questions, queries? Yes? No? Okay.
This is a ramble, sorry, because I haven't had a chance to organise my thoughts properly. And it's a combination of a reflection, a question, and an idea, I think, which are probably totally unrelated. At the very first NEAR seminar, Peter Molnar gave a presentation, that we should be focusing entirely on intra-individual change. That there's no place for the kind of research questions that we ask for inter-individual analytical approaches and methodologies. And we had a discussion following this. I think Ryan was part of the discussion about actually answering that question from a theoretical point of view, actually, rather than taking this kind of extremist position. That actually whether we adopt inter or intra or inter and intra approaches should be theoretically driven. And I've been kind of periodically asking myself what that might look like, and I'm really pleased because I think what you've proposed is the answer to that. You've got a really clear theoretical rationale for where to approach things from an intra perspective, where to propose them from an inter perspective, and how they might relate. So that's helped advance my thinking a little bit in context of a question I've been pondering myself. So thank you very much. Where did we go from that? Peter Molinar, again, Big Five totally falls apart when you look at it on an intra-individual level. So my question was how that might impact on what you're proposing here. And my thought was, wouldn't the department, or wouldn't the civil service be really interested? If you want to get into an institution, wouldn't the civil service be really interested in what you're proposing?
Yeah, I hope so. I might try to get in touch with the civil service. I think the Molinar work is fascinating. You know, I think it looks like I'm not an expert in his work, but there are differences between the kind of intra-individual work that we've been talking about today and his work, in that the models that I presented here, and I think the models that I've seen presented here today, are still group models. They're intra-individual, the models of the individuals analysed as a group, and a lot of the kind of Molinar work seems to be just a single individual, you know, heavily repeatedly sampled, you know, intensive kind of modelling and fitting the kind of dynamic factor models on top of that. I think there looks like that there is some work where they're trying to join that the group-based intra-individual and the dynamic factor style modelling. There was a article in Multivariate Behavioural Research that I've just read where Molinar lays out the kind of proposition again, and kind of interestingly, Albert Maydew Olivares comes back, and he's the former editor of Psychometrica, and saying, you know, I don't know if this is going to make any difference for our kind of predictive accuracy and that kind of thing. So I would like to get into that kind of work. It feels like you know, another step to go truly kind of single person intra individual.
Karin over there.
My topic is self-efficacy, and there is a lot of debate about how general you can go. Have you looked at that at all?
Yeah. Do you mean so? Do you mean in terms of? I guess there are different ways. You could talk about how general you should go in terms of model fit. Does the kind of factor model? Are you talking about the utility of the
conceptualization of the construct? From Bandura's point of view,
I see.
They say
Yeah.
that it's more a state. It's related to specific events in the future. So there's quite a lot of critique about going too general. They say that it loses its predictive utility.
Yeah, well, I mean, in the personality literature, certainly that seems to. There is this idea in the personality literature. They talk about Brunswick symmetry. I don't know if you've come across it, but the idea that if you're trying to predict a broad kind of performance outcome, have a broad kind of personality predictor. So our personality models tend to be more kind of predictive to the extent that the breadth of the predictor variable matches the breadth of the criterion. So maybe that's kind of an answer.
No, I guess just because you were labeling it generalized self-efficacy, so that was.
Oh yeah. I think that I used. So I'm not an expert. I liked the model. What I liked about that model was just the kind of conceptual rationale of the states carrying the effect of your perceptions of the kind of work environment onto your performance, and that being moderated by the traits. So I was just kind of taking that rather than Yeah, no, but I'll send you the article if you like, for Tim Judge. I'm sure he probably addresses it in there.
Okay.
Okay.
One more? Yes?
Just one thought, following up on this discussion of within and between person variation. So in your theoretical model, you have individual variables, and if I understood it right, such as individual goals and the individual's performance and so on, together with affective traits predicting negative affect, and negative affect then predicting behavior. The same then for disinhibition and externalizing behavior. Now, traditional personality psychology, and this would be an interaction then between individual variables and traits predicting affect. In traditional personality psychology, behavior was considered as an outcome of an interaction of situation and person. And now, what about taking into account in your modeling, then also in your empirical work, situational factors as well, and the interaction between situational factors and individuals' traits? And also, I mean, this might help to counter the possible argument that such a kind of work that individualizes deviant work behavior, right? I mean, it's the employee's fault, it's the teacher's fault, and so on. It's not the employer's fault, it's not the school's fault, the system's fault.
I agree with you, and I think that within model can be augmented, right, with kind of situational measures like the events that are happening right now in your immediate environment that prompted you to be in that state. So there is no reason why that model couldn't be augmented. And I think that I see work already going in that direction where, personality traits, the Big Five model, people, the kind of individual different psychologists recognize that traits aren't themselves causal because it's tautological, right? They're saying that the causal mechanisms are kind of socio-cognitive. Is kind of my interpretation of the situation gives rise to this particular way that I'm behaving. So I agree with you, but I also think that the modeling, the capability of the flexibility of the models could incorporate that.
Okay, thank you, Nigel.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah.